You're very welcome back. And we're coming in from a weekend where there were rumors of government's likely increase of value-added tax from 17.5% to 21% in the mid-year budget, which will be presented to Parliament on Thursday, July 19. Now, okay, so are these rumors true? Why don't we find out? We're joined by the Deputy Minister for Information, Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah. How nice to see you, Kojo.
How are you doing?
I'm very well. And thank you so much for making the time to be
Thanks
with
for the
us.
opportunity.
Yeah, you know what? Let's just get the answer. True? 17.5 to 21?
I don't know why you want to run ahead of yourself. Thursday is just around the corner, and the Finance Minister will be delivering the mid-year review of the budget, where admittedly he will speak to some revenue measures. Revenue measures don't necessarily mean tax increases. Revenue measures don't necessarily mean that VAT will go up. It is a broad basket of various instruments that are aimed at ensuring that we get a lot more revenue in the coming months to meet what remains of the administration's agenda. So I don't see why we should be ahead of ourselves. Thursday will be here shortly.
Now, I sort of expected that you wouldn't really reveal what is to be said on Thursday. But I'm now wondering whether part of the reason why you wouldn't reveal it is because perhaps you haven't settled on it yet. I mean, I know you've got an emergency cabinet meeting coming up tomorrow. No doubt the economic management team will be working towards that. Is it that you haven't quite decided yet?
No, we have.
How you want to do this?
I mean, last week the initial presentations were made. Some requests were made for some adjustments to some of the measures that we had in mind. Throughout the weekend, the final touches were put to it. Indeed, this morning, the economic management team will go through the process to sign off on the measures, and then on Tuesday, Cabinet will meet to sign off on those measures. So we're clear in our minds what we want to do. And on Thursday, by which time all of it would have been signed off, the Finance Minister would announce it. But I think, for me, what is heartwarming is to hear the nation go into a conversation about how do we fund the ideas that all of us want to see come to life. You would recall that since the Akufo administration came to power, we have had to spend the first year or so literally cleaning up the books. 1.5 years down the line, having cleaned up well enough, it is important to stretch forward and invest heavily in a number of areas. And it's heartwarming to hear the nation come together and have a conversation about what are the best ways of funding this. Because there are only two ways by which you can fund what remains of the agenda. You either borrow to fund it, and we have spoken over and over again about a debt overhang, increasing deficits, and how it's going to cripple us in the medium to long term, or you have to generate more revenue. And I mean, I've been reading a lot of social media commentary, receiving calls, participating in conversations where people are saying, no, we don't want to pay this. This looks like a more viable option. No, don't deepen the tax base per se, widen it so that more people are into it. And I think it's a good conversation. And I can assure you that we have listened extensively. And on Thursday, I'm hopeful that we'll all be excited with what we hear.
You know, the fact is, last year, the finance minister presented a budget, said, this is what we're going to raise, this is what we're going to spend it on. If at the mid-year point, we're hearing the finance minister say, well, if we're going to spend this, then we need to raise more because basically we're off target.
No, but he hasn't said that. He hasn't said that anywhere.
Right.
Take last year, for example, and in all of these things, when it comes to all of the fiscal analysis, one of the things that we always have to look out for is what we call the anchor, the fiscal anchor. And the fiscal anchor is the deficit. So no government just wakes up in the morning and says, I want to raise revenue and spend it for raising and spending's sake. You raise revenue to spend to achieve some objectives. Between what you raise and what you spend, sometimes you have to do a bit of financing. But what you always must be careful about is whether or not your financing is thrown out of gear. So you notice that in 2017, we did very well to keep the anchor, the fiscal anchor, which is the deficit, and actually to bring it from about 9% down somewhere to around 6% thereabout. This year, in all that we are doing, again, we want to take that anchor a bit lower, just about 4.5 to about 5% this year.
Right.
Now, so far, so very good. Indeed, when the finance minister reads his mid-year review on Thursday, you would notice that we have done very well on revenues this year. We are not 100% on target, but the gap is not one that will scare anybody. We've done very well on revenues. We've done very well on expenditures. And we are even very clear in our mind that between now and the end of the year, because, you know, our revenue is not linear. It comes in peaks and troughs. So with where we are, we're optimistic that we can close the year still holding our fiscal anchor and not throwing it out of gear.
But we're just a little off the mid-year target.
Yes, we are just a little off the mid-year target, which is, for want of a better expression, normal, because it comes in peaks and troughs. June usually is one of our best months. First quarter of the year, the economy is now picking up, etc., etc. So really, that is not a scary situation, and we are optimistic that we can meet our targets or be close to our targets by the end of the year. And I recall, I think you even moderated that show ahead of the 2018 budget. Myself, Madame Monacote in Parliament, where she said, "You will meet the deficit target." I mean, I'm sure you recall. In the end, we did it, and we think we can do it this year. But 2019-2020 requires a lot more expenditure. If you look at the administration's programs, after first year of stabilizing and investing in growth and social intervention programs, second year of doing same, you're going to notice that 2019-2020, we would have to spend a lot more money to achieve what remains of the administration's agenda.
So why not do that in the next budget?
No, but that is why you need to start that exercise now, because typically for revenue measures, when you introduce them now, it takes a while to put in place some of the systems to achieve it. I'll give you a few examples. At the beginning of this year, we said we're going to introduce a TIN number compliance program that ensures that we're able to mop up a lot more people, broaden the tax base. Right. Our target is to get about 1 million new taxpayers by the time the year is over. We're in June. We have come very far. The latest numbers I saw on Saturday morning, we've come very far, but we haven't hit that full target. Even if it's by September or October that we hit 1 million, you cannot therefore collect 12 months revenue from that new 1 million people who are in. So for revenue measures in particular, and that's why in many jurisdictions, revenue laws are even passed ahead of the budget, so that you have enough time and space to put together the infrastructure to make it happen. I'll give you another example, property rates. We spoke about it from October last year. This year we started working on it. The work that is ongoing is not completed yet. And therefore you won't get 12 months revenue from property rates this year. So if you don't start early, and if you say you're going to wait for 2019 or 2020 before you introduce any new revenue measures, you won't get the revenues in 2019, 2020 to fund the programs of 2019, 2020. So first, we must make it clear that when the minister or if the minister announces new revenue measures, it will not be because we have a gap and need to fill the gap this year. This year's gap, admittedly, there's a little gap by mid-year, but if we look at the trend, just like last year, we are optimistic that we can do it. What remains is to put in place measures that ensure that we can fund what is outstanding of the administration's agenda. And like I said, it's heartwarming to see the nation come together for a conversation like this about what the nation thinks is prudent and what the nation thinks is imprudent.
So if there are revenue measures taken after this review, it is to fund the next 2 years' budget.
Broadly.
Not to make up for a gap in this
Like
year's.
I've explained, the gap that we have is one that we have managed to meet in times past. And
just so to clarify that.
We're sure we can.
But then I guess that also raises the question of what are these items in 2019, 2020 that, you know, giving government cause to reassess your revenue?
It's not a reassessment per se, and I always want to caution that we don't create an impression that there's something wrong and we are trying to fix it. Right. It's a trajectory. So you take some of government's programs, and I won't go into any specifics because I don't want to take the wind out of the sail of the minister. You take some of government's programs that it has outlined. You'll notice that the sheer numbers or the size increases as the years go by. So year 1, year 2, your current revenue measures may be able to accommodate it. But as you are going on, as the numbers increase, you will need to find revenue measures that will accommodate them. That doesn't mean there's something wrong and you're trying to fix it. It's part of a trajectory that you are going. You do it here at Multimedia when you have to look out into the medium term and say by 2019, 2020, these are the new expenditure items or the expanded expenditure items that you need to spend money on. And it is in that line that we have to always be looking at raising more revenue to meet our needs. Look, we're in a country where tax to GDP ratio is about 16%. And tax to GDP ratio is a measure of how much of our GDP we are able to collect as taxes. Ideally, we should be doing a tax to GDP ratio of about 25%. That means that roughly about 10% of our GDP is not being taxed. Some of the data that we are seeing, if you take, for example, the Ghana Bar Association roll of registered lawyers, and you compare it to the number of lawyers who are known to the tax authorities who are paying their taxes, you will be shocked.
That not
people
a
are
factor of,
earning
poor employment.
Poor employment as
Perhaps they are trained lawyers, but they don't get work to do.
Oh no, these are functioning lawyers. That's what I'm saying. If you go to the Ghana Bar Association roll of lawyers who are listed and are functioning, and you compare it to the tax base, you'll be shocked. I mean, my colleague Charles Edubuahin was just talking about what's happening in the Ashanti region, for example, where you're having about only 47,000 individual registered taxpayers. And if you compare that to the voter database, again, you'll be shocked. So admittedly, we have a huge gap in this country where people are working and earning an income and are not paying taxes. And as a result, you, Kojo Youngson, have to be taxed some more. And that is what we have to move away from. And so if we introduce new revenue measures that ensure that we can mop in a lot more of these people, then the tax burden on an individual can at that point begin to go down. And that is what we really need to do so that we can fund the development agenda ahead of us.
From what you're saying, it's not very likely that we'll be seeing an increase in VAT then, because that would certainly be deepening the tax net rather than widening it, wouldn't it?
You found a nice way of going around the question back to me. But like I've said, I'm not going to take the wind out of the minister's sail. I've been explaining the philosophy with which we are going into this media. Let's listen to the minister.
Could this have been, and I really don't expect you to admit if it is, but could this have been, I got to ask because the question has occurred to me. I have a feeling that our viewers might be thinking the same. Could this have been perhaps one of those baits that was thrown out there to give a worst case scenario so that when eventually the media review comes along and it doesn't contain such scandalous suggestions, then people would actually be more receptive to what it does contain?
I would throw the question back at you. Where did the media start this speculation from? I've heard it on radio and TV all over. In fact, I have read news headlines in which I am quoted, supposedly quoted, as saying that Ghanaians will be willing to accept an increase in VAT when I haven't said any such thing. The media has created some very interesting narratives out there, and now the effort will be to say that this was, a spin thrown out there by government. I do not know any government official per se who has come out to say that VAT is going to go up per se. I've heard, for example, my colleague Kweku Kwatin mentioned that, yes, admittedly, we will have revenue measures in the media review. Like I'm saying here this morning too, we will have revenue measures. But some of the things that are being thrown out are just pure speculation.
Right, including the VAT increase.
The minister will speak on Thursday.
Okay, right. Now, let's talk about other areas of the economy in which, the performance of government obviously is constantly being assessed. Now, Business and Financial Times this morning reports that the private sector output growth, well, it's experiencing its lowest in 5 months. So, a downward trajectory there. Is this a cause of concern for a government that was touted to be the savior of the private sector, seeking to boost the economy through it? When you look at what it's been doing for the past 5 months, is there a cause for concern?
No, I mean, our objective is to ensure that we can stimulate growth, jobs, and prosperity. Indeed, and maybe I'll just digress and come back to your question. At the Ministry of Information, we've just announced the 2018 policy summits, and the theme is assessing the growth, jobs, and prosperity agenda. And we're going to Kumasi on the 23rd and 24th of July at the Golden Tulip Hotel to do this assessment right on the back of the media review. And perhaps I'll take advantage to invite your viewers who are in Kumasi to join us. So this is a mainstay of the administration. We desire to stimulate growth, jobs, and prosperity. And therefore, if at any point in time the growth we are looking at suffers a shock or doesn't hit the target, of course we will be concerned and we will interrogate that particular report, find out, most importantly, the whys and what needs to be done to bring it back on track.
Right. Now, although you've indicated that this thing about VAT is speculation, there have been some other suggestions of taxes that may be changing or even be introduced. For example, there is an expectation, according to the Daily Graphic, that the mid-year review will see an increase in the communications service tax from 6 to 12%. And possibly a mandated minimum corporate tax, an expanded stabilization tax, collateralization of royalties from minerals to enable the government raise loans.
Collateralization of royalties, for example, was mentioned in the 2018 budget.
Right.
So that will not be speculation.
Okay.
Many of the other things that are being mentioned again at this stage will remain speculation. Like I've said, what I think is good is that we're having this conversation. And I'll mention names, for example. I was reading my good friend Mabel Akubanase's wall, for example. I think she ran a poll, and at the end of the poll, she was, doing an analysis that, she's of the view that people are not interested in paying this particular measure. But again, even she concedes that we need to get more revenue to deliver on our agenda. And then she proceeds to list other revenue options that she thinks should be considered. And I think that it is healthy for all of these options to be out there and to be interrogated. This morning, I've heard your colleagues on radio at the Department of Economics doing a similar exercise. I think it's healthy. Let the speculation go on. Let the conversation go on. I know what we have agreed on at the end of the day, and I'm hopeful that when it is announced on Thursday, Ghanaians will be pleased that, one, we agree we need to raise more revenue to fund what remains of the agenda, and two, these measures we think we can accommodate. I'm hopeful.
Economic Management Team, Cabinet, how much of all of this conversation is feeding into the decisions that you'll be making in the next couple of days?
A lot of it. This administration is an administration that listens. I've been in journalism for many years before I joined politics. I've seen times when you give feedback to government and government officials are like, we're not going to listen. Kind of mentality. But I see a sense around the table that essentially says, what are the people interested in? And I see a certain proactive effort to even find out what the people are interested in. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to stop your work and just be, jump into the whims and caprices of what everybody says at any point in time. But it is important to listen. I do know that a lot of the conversation out there feeds back into government. We are the channels from my ministry through which we feed back into government, and we ferried a lot of it to government. And I do know that it affects the decisions that are made at the end of the day.
Doesn't that then mean that perhaps we're not entirely settled on what we're going to be hearing on Thursday?
As at now we are.
As at
now we are, but the conversation that has gone on has fed into it.
This has been very useful. I'm so glad you came and joined us.
Invite me some more.
Absolutely. Oppong-Nkrumah is, of course, the Deputy Minister for Information. He knows a little bit that we don't, but hopefully by Thursday we'll all be on the same page and we'll know what exactly government intends to do about raising revenue for the next half of the year.